As a young reporter on the Daily Express, one of the first big stories that I ever worked on was the eventual capture, the detention of the Yorkshire Ripper. And yesterday, Peter Sutcliffe, who was the Yorkshire Ripper, died. And there'll be a lot of people who will be very, very relieved about that. You might think, why would people be relieved to see a mass killer die in jail? Because of the thousands, and I mean thousands of lives he affected, and the millions whose lives were blighted for 5 years in the north of England. So, folks, it's going to be explosive. Stick around. We've got it all for you over the next 2 hours, okay? Good. Right, okay, haven't got that out of the way, folks. What can I tell you now? What I can tell you now is the Yorkshire Ripper situation. I'm just going to review the Yorkshire Ripper situation because it's a story we're coming to later in the show. We've got all sorts of experts talking to us, criminologists and those who can comment on the dire and serious and inexplicable mind of Peter Sutcliffe. But I can add something to that, because I worked on that case. It was absolutely amazing. You have no idea whatsoever of the terror that this man spread across about 1/3 of this country for at least 5 years, from 1975 to 1980, okay? I would say in a band from sort of Geordieland, because there was a hoaxer who thought it was funny to keep sending tapes to the police who had a Geordie accent. So from Geordieland right the way down to the Midlands, because this guy worked in Yorkshire and Lancashire across the Pennines, but, further south people were very wary. He held the country in a grip of terror, seriously a grip of terror. Now, the interesting thing is that at the very end, which happened yesterday, after 40 years in jail, he decided to take his own life. Because in effect what happened was he was taken out of jail in Durham, serving his sentence in the high security jail in Durham, Franklin, I think it was. And he was taken to hospital, and he issued an instruction to doctors, do not resuscitate should he go into a coma and be on the way out, having contracted COVID-19, okay? That's very interesting. By the time he got to that hospital, after all the years in prison, he was nearly blind. He got attacked once in prison. Some would say he had it coming, and one of his eyes was badly gouged by another prisoner. But he'd gone almost blind anyway through some sort of disease of the eyes, obviously. He was also in terrible shape. He was incontinent. He had a colostomy bag at the end, and he had to be led round the prison by the hand because he was almost incapable. So, even inside prison, he wasn't having much of a lifestyle. Not that he ever deserved one, of course. But what I want to do is ask you this. And this is the first question we're putting out on the show tonight. And I want all of you to think hard about this and come back to me, please, okay? A, should Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, who wreaked so much terror in this country, should he have been allowed to choose his moment of passing? Or, as he was serving a full life sentence, like about, got the numbers here, about 35 other people in this country, full life sentence mean 31 sentenced by judges to full life sentences, you don't get out. Should he have been made to live until he died of natural causes? You could say COVID-19 was natural, but if he said he didn't want to be resuscitated, he chose his own moment of death. He could have been revived and could have been sent back to Franklin. So the question is, A, should he have been allowed to choose his own moment? Or B, what about this one, folks? What about this one? I've often wondered about people who are on these full life terms, spend 40, maybe longer years in jail. If it was me, I would ask for the option to take my own life at the start of my sentence. You wouldn't get me spending 40 years in a prison. I can't stand incarceration. I hate hotel bedrooms sometimes because they feel like you're confined and all that kind of stuff. I certainly couldn't live in a prison. So, for all full-term life prisoners, should they be allowed the option of execution? Because think of the cost of keeping Peter Sutcliffe in prison for the past 40 years. Not only has he been in prison, of course, he's been in Broadmoor, which is our top security jail for the insane. He was in there for about 30 years of his sentence, and then adjudged to have cured or been cured of the mental illness that doctors had originally diagnosed he had. That's even more expensive than prison, by the way, and has a reputation for being a bit more luxurious than the ordinary prison. So, if you're going into prison and knowing you're never coming out, should you have the option to say, I don't want to spend 40 years in prison? Should we say, well, that's good, because that takes a great deal of expense off the state looking after you for your worthless and pointless life, which is going nowhere, because you're never going to do anything worthwhile in your life again. What's the point of living if you know you're going nowhere and you're going to return to a cell every evening at about 8 o'clock when they switch your lights out, and then you wake up the next day and you find out of your cell and you have a scraggy bacon breakfast or something like that? Anybody who wants that sort of existence? Well, certainly not me. But would it be too kind? Would it be too kind to give full life-term prisoners the option to say, no, I don't fancy that. I'll take execution instead? I would like to hear from you, please, to see whether or not any of you think, as I do, that I think it's an option. The number 0344 499 1000. By the way, when you contact Talk Radio, and I love you to contact me, please, because you are the essence of the show, let me tell you, you can tweet at Talk Radio, or you can tweet at Mike Parry 8. That's me, by the way. Or you can text Talk and your message to 87222. Streaming live, by the way, the whole show streaming live on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Talk Radio, okay? Let me tell you a bit more about the Ripper, okay? I was in the Daily Express newsroom the night that the Ripper was captured. There was a buzz around the media world, a buzz around the north of England that they'd found somebody. Those buzzes had come before, because in 5 years, Peter Sutcliffe evaded capture. A lot of people say it was down to incompetent policing. I don't go with that. The police had a hell of a difficult job for a man who's roaming round in a number of different cars, attacking innocent women, all innocent women. Some of them are sex workers. And only yesterday did they get an apology from the West Yorkshire Police for having not been called innocent all those years ago. There's an allegation the police only took interest when the fifth victim was a 16-year-old student. And when she was killed, the police had the sort of attitude that, oh, well, it's got real now. You know, she's the first innocent. That was actually said by a police officer. She's the first innocent, okay? Different times, but misogyny of the highest order. Let's get rid of that, okay? They were all innocent. All those ladies were innocent. Some of them were working in the sex industry, I should say, to try and put food on the table for their children, having been abandoned by their husbands. Some of them had drug problems. It's a common factor in people who work in the sex industry, okay? But every one of them left a family behind. And every one of them has been remembered fondly by their families, as we realised yesterday when the terrible, shocking tales came out. But tens of thousands of people were put in, hundreds of thousands of people were put in fear, particularly women. Let me tell you this, an interesting fact. Anyway, so I'm in the Daily Express newsroom that night. The phone goes. It's a chap in a district of Bradford called Heaton, and basically said that there was an awful lot of activity in his road. And this sounded interesting. So a bit of, research and all that, trying to find out who he might be talking about. We isolated the fact that Peter Sutcliffe lived opposite, and we managed to establish by a process of elimination, by making a couple of phone calls, that the man opposite, Peter Sutcliffe, had been arrested on suspicion of being the Yorkshire Ripper, okay? And we put that in a headline that night, and it was a great boost for us all. But I'm not celebrating that. I'm not celebrating this was a journalistic scoop. I'm celebrating the fact that Sutcliffe was captured. Within 2 hours of being taken into custody, he just confessed. He just literally confessed. And when his wife Sonia was allowed into the police station to see him, she walked into the room aghast, and he just said, "Sorry, son, I'm the Yorkshire Ripper. It was me. I killed all those women." The policeman who found him, a young copper, picked him up because he was in a car that had a false number plate. So they lifted him. He had a sex worker in the car with him. She was going to be his next victim. They took him to the police station. There was a missing factor. Where were the tools that he normally used to kill? A ball hammer, where he smashed women on the back of the head and shattered their skulls. A knife, in which, for instance, his first victim was stabbed 57 times into the same body, okay? This man was such a piece of filth that he would sometimes go back to the site of his victim, who hadn't been found yet by a member of the public walking their dog or something, and drag the corpse out to make it more public because he loved the notoriety, okay? This is the sort of guy he was, an utter, dreadful, murdering maniac. And thank God he was taken off the streets in 1980. Some would say he should have been taken off the streets earlier. My father, how about this? My dear dad, who's been passed away now some 38 years, he was taken in and questioned about being the Yorkshire Ripper, as were 100,000 other men in the north of England, because the police were so banjaxed at trying to find this guy. They'd set up roadblocks, they'd stop cars, they'd ask you your name and address. Where have you been? Where are you going? They'd take your name and address, and then you might get a letter, as my father did, to go and visit a police station, please, and answer a few questions. And my dad did. It was a process of elimination. There was so much, not evidence, there was so much information on people who thought they knew who the Yorkshire Ripper was, that the control room for the investigation had to be evacuated when the joints in the floor started bowing because there were so many filing cabinets in it, the roof was going to collapse. That's the way it was. There were no computers in those days. There was no cross-checking. 9 times Peter Sutcliffe was arrested by the police, and 9 times he just said, no, it wasn't me. And on one occasion, he managed to work out an alibi, which his wife stood up for him because she believed what her husband had told her. But, oh, the blunders you wouldn't believe. They had a footprint of his shoe, and they showed him a picture of the footprint of his shoe while he was in a police station wearing the same pair of shoes. They never found out. An apple was left at one scene, and whoever had bitten the apple had a gap between the 2 front teeth. Peter Sutcliffe had a big gap before his 2 front teeth. But perhaps the main clue that was missed, because there was no cross-information, was Sutcliffe gave a sex worker a £5 note for services rendered and then murdered her. He then realised that that £5 note could lead to him. He went back to the body and tried to recover the £5 note, but the lady concerned had put it in a secret compartment in her handbag where she hid stuff so that people couldn't steal her money. Because when you're a sex worker, it's a pretty nasty old business out there on the streets, okay? So guess what? He dragged the body out. He thought the £5 must have gone, but the £5 hadn't gone. The police found it. And do you know what? The police found out that that £5 note had come from the company where Peter Sutcliffe worked as a lorry driver. They traced it that close to Peter Sutcliffe, but still didn't arrest him. Anyway, that's the story of Peter Sutcliffe. It's a shocking tale, okay? He's now died. Many will say, we hope he rots in hell. We're going to look at the Peter Sutcliffe story with criminologists who can get to the bottom of what motivates a monster like that and how we can ever stop it happening again, okay? But we're going to kick off the show with Dominic Cummings. He's the man of the moment at the moment. I mean, when I say the man of the moment, I'm not saying that he's necessarily the most successful man at the moment or even the nicest man at the moment, but he certainly is the man at the moment. He and Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, appear to have fallen out big time. So give me a call, folks, please. I'll remind you the number, 0344 499 1000. Should Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, have been allowed to take his own life, which he did at the end because he said he did not want resuscitating from the effects of COVID-19, or more the way I would have liked it, should he have been allowed to have taken his own life 40 years ago when he was sentenced at the Old Bailey for murdering 13 women and trying to murder another 10. And they're only the women we know about. That's the sort of monster Sutcliffe was.